What is today Latin America was once many native nations. Spain, Portugal, France, England, the Dutch, and Danish invaded. They carried out genocide after genocide and enslaved both natives and Africans. After independence, most new governments were still white-dominated, with more genocides against natives in nations like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. European powers hold on to some territories even today and kept invading to take their colonies back. The United States invaded too, overthrowing or trying to overthrow over 60 governments. The last attempt in the year 2020 in Venezuela. The U.S. also took half of Mexico's land and a tenth of its people, and then Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. There is a long history of many Americans fearing and hating Latinos. Latin America's image and reality is often one of instability, poverty, drug cartels, revolutions, corruption, and refugees. But it did not have to be this way. Latin America could remain all or mostly native nations. I spoke about this in detail in the previous series, What If Natives Won? Poverty, white domination, and foreign invasions could have been stopped, prevented, or limited. The U.S. could have been more Latino culturally, with higher numbers of Latinos. The U.S. could have been less racist, less dominating, or the U.S. could be defeated. Some Latin American nations could even become regional or world powers. There is a huge lack of alternate history about Latin America and Latinos. So much alternate history is Europe-centered, mostly because so much history and history teaching is Europe-centered. This series is dedicated to scenarios, points of departure, and possibilities of Latin American victory within Latin America and a more Latino or less racist American society. My name is Al Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. My next history book will be Genocide Denial in America, about the 7 genocides against indigenous people that took place in the U.S. that most people were never taught about, don't know, or deny. I've also written some science fiction, mostly alternate history. One story, Timely Saviors, appeared in a short story collection, The Witness Paradox. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story alternate history collection, What If Natives Won? I've also written a sci-fi alternate history book, The Man in Black, the first of a series. Simón Bolivar is the most famous, most admired, and most debated of all Latin Americans. A George Washington figure for 3 nations, Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador, and the closest Latin America ever came to the dream of many Latin American nationalists of one nation uniting many or even all of the former Spanish colonies. At one point his nation included Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, part of Peru, and Venezuela, with claims on Costa Rica and part of Nicaragua, and rebels in Cuba and Puerto Rico wanting to ally with or even join this nation. After over a decade of fighting to drive out Spain, Bolivar was president of Gran Colombia and briefly Peru and Bolivia. Bolivar proposed a government he called, quote, centralist. It was a dictatorship in all but name. Presidents would be for life. The Senate would be of nobles and also for life. Presidents choose who the next president will be. Only the tribunes, like a Congress, would be elected. There would also be censors, a combination of prosecutors and judges, there to keep any branch from getting too powerful, in theory. A constitutional convention split, ending without a constitution. Other independence leaders were angered at Bolivar's desire for power. Bolivar was almost assassinated. So Bolivar ordered over a dozen executions, including some who weren't even involved. This wasn't the first time. There were hundreds of Spaniards executed during the War for Independence. Revolts still broke out against Bolivar for the next 2 years. Finally, Venezuela and Ecuador broke away. Bolivar quit the presidency, went into exile, and died a few years later from tuberculosis. Bolivar's defenders point out that all of Bolivar's critics actually set up the same kind of government Bolivar proposed. This was the age of caudillos, dictators who treated a nation like their own plantation, to be used for personal profit, and full of ego and intolerant of dissent. What many claim is that as long as you have a dictator, why not have one like Bolivar who wants to unite a large, powerful nation and eventually see it evolve into a democracy. There are some who argue Bolivar was actually too lenient. When José Páez led an uprising, Bolivar not only pardoned him, he kept him as a military commander. Some argue that Francisco Santander was either part of the assassination attempt, or at least knew about it in advance. Santander was quickly condemned with little evidence, but again pardoned by Bolivar. Executing both rivals would eliminate some of his opposition. Even if the opposition leaders were killed off, Bolivar would still need to break the power of several groups. The Catholic Church controlled education and civil laws like marriage. It was a huge property owner, and they often sided with the wealthy. Yet the Church also helped protect natives and Africans from abuse. Bolivar or his successor would need to limit the Church's power and wealth, but also work with its priests and monks that side with social justice for blacks and Indians. Even more than that, he would need to break the power of wealthy Criollo elites, white South Americans who spent most of their time fighting for power among themselves. This is demanding a lot of Bolivar, who died only a few years later of his illness. This demands either a what if where Bolivar lives longer, or he appoints a successor who thinks and acts as he did. It would also need a Bolivar and a successor able to break the long tradition in Latin America of a military that thinks of itself as above the law, as the true spirit of the nation, and willing to overthrow democracy. It needs a military that follows orders from civilians. What Bolivar hoped for was that his system of censors would keep future military dictators from happening. Not long after Bolivar left office, Gran Colombia and Peru went to war over the status of Bolivia. Gran Colombia won and gained territory from Peru, but the conflict led to Gran Colombia breaking apart. That war was the closest Latin America ever came to being united. A Gran Colombia that could be today's Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, Bolivia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. Such an enormous nation could be in conflict with Mexico over the rest of Central America, meaning if Gran Colombia wins, then Gran Colombia might also include what became Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. All of this would depend most of all on Latin America's criollos being willing to share power with mestizos, natives, mulattoes, and blacks, and in criollos being willing to set aside petty desire for local power. It would take very skilled leaders and much luck, and criollos being willing to break down a caste system that benefited them. But if Gran Colombia somehow does overcome all those obstacles, succeeds in staying united, it would today be enormously powerful. It would today be over 200 million people with enormous resources. A united, powerful nation that could fight off most or all Latin American invasions, coups, coup attempts, and other tyranny and attempts to control, exploit, and subvert them. It likely would be a rival to the U.S., and there might have been a full-scale war between them at some point. If Gran Colombia's initial elites were willing to share power and allow a more equal society, that might be enough to bring about a more prosperous and industrial society sooner, enabling America's defeat. Certainly the U.S. rise as an imperial power would be far different, and so would be the Cold War, assuming it still even happens. This is the end of the 7th video. Please repost freely, like, quote, and comment. This has been Latin American Victory. Next time we will discuss what if Father Hidalgo wins.